Hello, everybody. So, yeah, Stanley, the one of the creators, I believe, of Marvel, or at least someone that got hired and created the majority of the various superhero franchises at Marvel, um, has passed away. Notably, he has been either the creator or a very much influencing force in Spider-Man, Captain America, Iron Man, pretty much the Incredible Hulk, a lot of different superheroes at Marvel, and of course has been one of the driving forces within the MCU. And one of the things you may recognize Stan Lee for is his various cameos within a lot of the Marvel movies and some of the TV shows and some of the video games. And my favorite thing that Stanley has ever done in terms of his work is create Spider-Man. And Spider-Man is honestly my favorite superhero of all time. And, Stanley, from how I've heard him describe how they came about to create Spider-Man, it's very, very well done in terms of they um, how they ended up creating Spider-Man. And the one of the last few games I just got through playing for my gaming channel is the latest Spider-Man game, and Stanley did have a cameo in that game at the beginning of it. And that's not the only Spider-Man game he had a hand in um, being in, for at least recording his voice for it. He also had a role in Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, of which he was the narrator for the beginning and ending, and some of the in-between cutscenes for the game. And he was which, by the way, if you have not played Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, I recommend it. It's actually a really good game, and in all honesty, kind of influenced the next bunch of Spider-Man games to follow it. Certainly the other ones created by Beanox, but also I would say also a bit the one that Insomniac just released, and he also was in the Amazing Spider-Man game, of which Peter in that game references the fact that he's looking after an apartment for his friend Stan, who is out of town. But then Stanley gets a cameo in some DLC for the game, which I don't believe is available anymore on either the Xbox Live Marketplace or PSN Store, or maybe any other places that the game may have been released on, because of the fact that since the game was created by Activision and Activision no longer owns the property, they delisted all the digital versions of the games, and as well as the DLC for most of the games that they released under themselves when they had the things, or when they had the rights to the characters to create games for. But he also had a bigger role in, or at least a more obvious role in. Actually, I think that Stanley makes a voice cameo later in the game when he calls Peter. In the second half of the Amazing Spider-Man game, which, by the way, the Amazing Spider-Man game is actually not that bad a game. It may be a little bit easy, and it's a bit of a different flavor than the Insomniac game, but I'd honestly recommend playing that game too, especially if you don't like Amazing Spider-Man 2, the movie. I don't recommend playing Amazing Spider-Man 2, the game, but I was going to say, in the game version or the game that came at the same time as Amazing Spider-Man 2, the movie, even though it's not polished and it's not really that good, Stanley does have a cameo in it, and in all honesty, he's probably the best part of that game. So, yeah. And he also has some cameos in the Lego Marvel games, like Lego Marvel Superheroes 1 and 2, Lego Marvel's Avengers, and all that. And he just appears in these short cameos in basically very tertiary kind of ways. Like, find all the Stanleys in all of the levels and everything. So yeah, I don't know if he appears as a playable character because I haven't played Lego Marvel superheroes in a few years. But and I didn't really play to 100% completion. I just played through the main story and didn't really do anything in terms of the side content. But yeah. Uh, but he also appeared in a lot of different Marvel stuff. Not only just Marvel stuff, but also a few other things. Like he had a cameo in the Teen Titans Go to the Movies movie that came out earlier this year, which I understand that I've seen the clip of that. I understand that the movie is a comedy, and I understand Teen Titans Go is a comedy, but Teen Titans Go isn't really a good show, and I don't believe that that movie is really that good from what I've seen and heard of it. Um, and it just feels like Stanley's cameo was kind of forced. Either that or the joke was very obvious, and they didn't really do anything to make it that special, just like the rest of Teen Titans Go. So, yeah. But, other than that, Stanley has appeared in a lot of the Marvel movies. I remember his cameos in the original Spider-Man trilogy, which, in all honesty, is probably one of my favorite trilogies in superhero movies. The first Spider-Man was good. Second Spider-Man was great. Third Spider-Man could have been great, if it was written better. But, yeah. And then the Fantastic Four movies, kind of good. And, by the way, he was a mail carrier in, he played the character of Willie Lumpkin in the first Fantastic Four movie, or I guess technically the second, because the first one was actually in the 90s, but that was just to keep the rights. He played a mail carrier in that before he did in, I believe, the second Avengers, or maybe it was Civil War, either way. And then in Rise of the Silver Surfer, he had a weird cameo in that he was playing himself, which most of the time he kind of does in these movies, but yeah. But yeah, then he had I've been recently rewatching the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, and he has a long list of cameos. In fact, we'll probably see a lot of cameos still that he pre-filmed for these later movies. We'll probably be still seeing cameos of him up until sometime maybe at the beginning of Phase 4, maybe even a little bit after that. Because they were pre-filming cameos for him for the last few years to stick into these movies, because of his advanced age. They've been doing that. So, and if you've watched the last several MCU movies that he's appeared in, it's quite obvious that they did. Spider-Man: Homecoming, I think, is the most blatant because he was obviously just on a set and they filmed it, probably in the span of like 10 minutes, which isn't necessarily bad, but as his cameos went on and on, they got a bit less interactive, which Stanley's cameos are always the ones where or the best cameos that he's had, are always the ones where he's in the scene and whatever else. But, he's had some really good cameos within the MCU. The first Iron Man movie, Tony Stark mistakes him for Hugh Hefner, although Stanley was dressed as Hugh Hefner, so maybe that was the joke. I like his cameo in The Incredible Hulk, which he drinks a soda that is tainted with Bruce Banner's blood, and he goes, "Whoa," and then drops the drink. Which is actually probably one of my favorite cameos of him. I'll say what my favorite cameo of his is in a second. Then in Iron Man 2, he's dressed as Larry King, and basically, I believe, is Larry King. Which I bet Larry King got a good kick out of back in 2010 when that movie came out, if he saw it. And I rewatched Thor, and I do like his cameo there, where he's just one of the people that came up and tried to lift Thor's hammer, which is funny. So, yeah. And then Captain America, the First Avenger, really nice cameo, where he said, "I thought he'd be taller," to Steve, or to a guy who Comes out when they want Captain America to come out on stage during something where I believe Captain America went off to go save one of the infantry regiments that were trapped, I think. Um, then his Avengers cameo was nice, where he's just like, superheroes in New York, give me a break. Um, so, yeah, and then he just goes on to have more and more cameos. But my favorite cameo of his is not in one of the MCU films, it's actually in Spider Man 3, where he has the line, I guess one person can make the difference, or make a difference. And then says, "Nuff said." It's probably one of the longer cameos that he has. One of the ones where he definitely has more lines than usual, but I do like it. And I think that is going to be the defining quote that I'm going to have when discussing Stan Lee, because he was just one guy, and yet, along with some other people, he was able to build a multi-million dollar to even billion dollar franchise off of his creations at Marvel. And whether it's comic books, TV shows, animated works, movies, he definitely went to great lengths to have these things be known and beloved by so many. And that's kind of the inspiring story of Stanley. And all that time, he remained humble too. Like, even though there was some drama between him and Jack Kirby, I believe, and maybe Steve Ditko or maybe a few other people at Marvel who co-created some of these superheroes with. Stanley, for the most part, did seem to remain humble over the last however many years, and that's kind of one of the best things about Stanley. He didn't appear to be really any changed by the experience. Whenever he saw him in either the movies or interviews or whatever, um, he always seemed to remain humble, and he is he always seemed to be a really, really cool guy. And I kind of wish that I got the chance to meet him and maybe say hi and whatever else, but yeah. And I wasn't expecting to make this video for another several years, because I just kind of expected him to, still be living for several more years, but he was 95, so yeah. And it definitely was a really, really good life that he lived and everything. And his wife had unfortunately died last year, back in July of last year, I believe. And he at 95 as well, and it was really, really interesting. Okay, so I just looked on IMDb for if and for the documentary Trek Nation that Gene Roddenberry's son made several years ago, back in 2011. If you have not seen the documentary, it's actually really, really cool to see that. It was on Netflix for a while, but it got taken off because they didn't have the streaming rights anymore. They expired. But if you can go see this documentary, it's really, really good. Gene Roddenberry's son Rod actually got to interview Stan Lee a bit the for the documentary, and the words Stan Lee had to say about Star Trek is actually really, really cool. Normally, you don't get Stan Lee talking about anything outside of Marvel, at least normally, that you see. But the nice words he had to say about Gene Roddenberry and Star Trek and everything, in that, though they were short because of how the movie was edited and whatever else, and probably as long as they had, or as long as Rod had to ask Stan Lee some questions or get his thoughts on Star Trek and his father and everything, were very nice. Just that was like, that's how Stan Lee will be remembered, as this guy who seemed very, very nice in everything, and that is probably true to the spirit of the real person that Stanley um, it was, is slash was, and whatever else. Um, there are some weird cameos that Stanley has had, though. Like he was in Princess Diaries 2, which is really, really weird. Um, and like I said, Teen Titans Go to the Movies. Although that was for a joke. Princess Diaries 2 had nothing to do with him, so you wonder why he was in the movie, other than maybe they offered it to him and he was like, okay, I'll do it. Um, yeah, one cameo I hope he has upcoming is a cameo in Kingdom Hearts 3, because Kingdom Hearts 3 is having the Big Hero 6 movie incorporated into its plot, where they have a world based on that movie, and it's acting as a sequel to the movie. And I am honestly hoping that that Tetsuya Nomura, in terms of writing that world with the writers of the game, and when he directed it, I'm hoping that he has a cameo within the game, whether it's, maybe reusing his lines from the original movie, or maybe he reprises his role from the movie. I'm seriously hoping that they incorporated that somehow into Big Hero 6, and maybe you can talk to his character for a second, because they have voice dialogue now for the NPC, what are they called? The companion characters from each world, and rather than just text dialogue. And I would love to just see Stanley in that game somehow, in the Big Hero 6 world, and everything. And that would be really, really cool if they managed to do that. I can imagine that Tetsuya Nomura maybe thought that that was a good idea when they were writing the game and he was designing stuff for the game. I could imagine that he thought that would really be cool. So I'm hoping that Stanley does have a cameo in the upcoming Big Hero 6 world and Kingdom Hearts 3. But yeah, Stanley realistically is a man who led a very long and seemingly good life. Like, he had an illustrious career in comic book writing, and just other things that he did for Marvel, and a lot of other stuff to do with Marvel and other stuff for that. And he lived a while, you know. And unfortunately, he was about a month and 16 days, I believe, short of his 96th birthday, unfortunately. But, 95 years, I don't really think you could hope for more than that, because realistically, the human lifespan is only about 70, 80 years at present. So, yeah. Unfortunately, there weren't some of the best things in the last year of his life, like the fact that he apparently got accused by a someone who um, was wasn't someone who some woman who worked for an agency or company or something that was just like helping for the or, yeah, for help for the elderly and whatever else. I know I heard that, and it's just like, it seems kind of like a shitty allegation to have against Stanley and everything, you know. But it really doesn't seem logical that Stanley would have done what she said he did, especially at the fact that he was 94, 95 years old at the time. So it made no sense to me. But yeah. Um But, Stan Lee, you will be remembered. You will be missed. You had a profound effect on comics, on movies, on people, on a lot of different things. And, you know, long career, long life. I don't think you could hope for better than what Stan Lee had, in all honesty, in terms of a career and a life. And it's sad to see him go, but I think a lot of people who knew how old Stan Lee was. It realistically was a bit of a long time coming, but you just never thought he would die. You thought that he would uh, live for a long while, but yeah. So I don't really have much else to say, and I don't really know how to end this. So I'll just end this on Stan Lee's catchphrase. So links description to my customary sign off for videos. Links description on my shit. Subscribe if you want. I'll see you guys in the next one. Excelsior. And enough said.